Now, here's why you need creeds. New Testament scholars who work in the area of sociology and so on, and what was Israel like at that time and what were the people like, they have estimated that up to 90% of Jesus' listeners were illiterate. Now, some estimates are as low, quote, low, as 70. That's still pretty high. 70 to 90% were probably illiterate. How do you teach Christianity, that Christianity is true, in a way that somebody could take it and reproduce your message to somebody else? If what I said a moment ago is true, and the center of Christianity is the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus, I want them, if I'm Paul, I want them to remember the deity, death, and resurrection, not what happened when Moses died and Joshua took over. I mean, there's levels of importance in Scripture, and it's all Scripture, but I want them to remember it. So, how do I get them to remember the deity, death, and resurrection? Maybe invented is not a good word, but they developed little tiny sayings. These creedal passages often read like this: da 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 da. We have secular creeds in our society and we have religious creeds in our society. If you're teaching 5-year-olds how to read, you might have a song that says A, B, C, D, E, F, G. All right. So that, and they remember the song, so they remember the letters. Wow, now they're on their way to putting words together. Or we might have little ditties like Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Or we might say, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Those are secular examples. A Christian example, a very good one, would be Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was blind, but, and we sing those. And here's the crazy thing. Can a 5-year-old say Jack and Jill, or row, row, row your boat, or sing Amazing Grace and not be able to write their name? Absolutely. Absolutely. They learn how to do this and they're learning in school. In the early church, they had these little ditties that would help them remember the important points. And guess what? Of all these creedal passages in the New Testament, but about 80% of them are in the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Now, if I were to say to you, here's dozens of these, and the number one topic is the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus, I would say, how important do you think that topic was in the early church? It was central. So I want that in my books. So what I do is I repeat these creeds. Now, here's the important thing. Critics, atheist New Testament scholars, let me use Ludemann. Ludemann said that creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 to 5 at least, and probably 3 to 7, that early creed, Ludemann, atheist New Testament scholar, he says that creed goes back to 30 to 33 AD in the time prior to Paul's conversion. Now, I can't give all the reasons they know this. The other category, the Acts sermon summaries. They're most commonly in Acts 1 through 5, 10, and 13. And let me use Bart Ehrman for this one. Bart Ehrman says those Acts sermon summaries, many of them go back to the 30s AD. 30s. That means we have historical reports of what was preached in the earliest church. Jimmy Dunn says that creed in 1 Corinthians 15 was probably put together within months of the cross. Months. Larry Hurtado, an American New Testament scholar, says days. He was the head of the religion department, University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Good guys. Now, Hurtado was a believer, but Ludemann's not a Christian. Ehrman's not a Christian. I'm not being mean. They'll say that. They'll tell you they're not Christians. Why do they date these creeds, the Acts sermon summaries and the Pauline creeds? Why do they date them in the 30s? And why does Ludemann say within the first 3 years? And why does Hurtado say days later? This is the point. Creeds give us a window on what the earliest, most authoritative preaching was. So here's my argument. What's the center of Christianity? Deity, death, resurrection. What did they do? They preached it. How did they keep it in circulation? By developing creeds. How early these creeds? Go back to the 30s and some to 30 to 33. We call that's pre-Pauline. Before he was even converted, he knew these creeds, or he'd heard of them, or at least the data on which the creeds are based. If they go back to the beginning, guess what? We are hearing the words of the original apostolic witnesses. This thing is noise so many times, 80% of the creeds